Do you know someone like this, my dear friends? Someone running a plain, unremarkable business out of an office with no stylish furniture, no flashy sign or logo, where the boss is simply themselves, maybe a neighbor, maybe a relative, maybe an old coworker. It's a decision most people avoid purely out of pride, yet the people who actually build wealth make it without a second thought. As someone who has spent over 30 years as a manager at a multinational finance company, I studied what really separates people who stay tied to a paycheck for decades from those who break free of it. And I traced it back to a single shift in mindset. Right now, you can't quite pin this idea down in your head, and you don't even realize it's costing you time and money. Before we dive in, let me introduce myself briefly. I've been in the world of finance and accounting for more than 30 years, and I've spent the last 10 of those years studying how ordinary people build wealth or destroy it. And in that decade, I've seen a pattern repeat so often that it stopped surprising me long ago. The people who genuinely turn their finances around don't get there through luck. They get there by starting something boring but durable, something almost entirely unexciting, the kind of business you wouldn't bother mentioning at a dinner party. And it's precisely that boredom that makes it work. Now let's look at what actually changes inside a person, both internally and externally. Once they decide to start a boring business, because what truly transforms your life is what happens in your head after you begin. First of all, the narrative that almost every business fails is largely an exaggerated myth. According to Bureau of Labor Statistics data updated through 2024, 20.4% of businesses fail in their first year. 49.4% fail within the first 5 years, and 65.3% fail within the first 10 years. That sounds negative, but flip it around, and it means more than half of all businesses are still standing after 5 years. And here's the key point: survival rates vary enormously by industry. Boring, essential service businesses almost always sit at the top of that table, while tech startups, fashion brands, and apps sit near the bottom. So let's walk through what actually changes in someone's life once they decide to start a boring business. The first shift is that your money stops being tied to your energy. This is the most obvious shift, but also the most misunderstood one. Whether you work for someone else or you're a freelancer or a consultant, your income stays directly tied to your effort, your hours, and your energy. If you don't work for a day or you get sick, you don't get paid. You burn out mentally and you earn less, no matter how well it pays. This is the quiet trap of nearly every job. A boring business doesn't sever that link overnight, but it breaks it far faster than most other business models. Take self storage as an example. When you build a rented storage unit business, you don't need to be physically present to make money. The tenant pays into your account every month. The unit sits where it is, and all you do is manage the system. According to data from late 2025, the average monthly rent for a roughly 100 square foot storage unit without climate control sits around $120, and you can build dozens of these units running in parallel to generate steady income without ever clocking in. Compare that to selling your time by the hour, where you're the one showing up for the job. If you take a week off, your income stops completely, but if you own 10 rented storage units and go on a week's vacation, the money keeps coming in exactly the same. That's where the real mindset shift begins. The first time someone experiences this, seeing money arrive without them being present at the point of work, something shifts in their head. They stop measuring their worth by hours worked and start measuring it by the systems they've built. And once that shift happens, it's irreversible, much like learning to ride a bike. You simply can't unlearn it. Morgan Housel put it beautifully somewhere when he said that true luxury isn't having more money, it's having control over your own time. And even though it may not look that way at first, a boring business is one of the fastest ways to buy back that control. I want to be honest here because I don't want to sell you dreams that never come true. In the beginning, almost every boring business demands your time and energy intensely. Nobody buys 10 storage units and takes a vacation the next day. The first few months, sometimes the first year, feel like having a second job. But this one is yours. The real payoff shows up once the system is in place and you start delegating pieces of the process, hiring someone for maintenance, automating collections, building a set method for solving the most common problems. That's when the income starts detaching from your physical presence. That's the turning point. Let me ask you a direct question. How many hours a week does your income depend entirely on your physical presence at the job? If the answer is all of them, that's not necessarily bad, but it's valuable information. Hold on to it, we'll use it later. The second shift concerns the psychological factor, and honestly, I think this is the most underrated one. We're living in an era where good looking businesses, the kind you can show off on social media, get all the attention, a clothing brand, an app, a digital product, they all look great in social media stories. But notice something interesting. Almost nobody posts a story saying, I opened a new storage facility today, or I just opened my third laundromat. That's exactly where the advantage of choosing a boring business begins. You automatically remove yourself from the race for social validation. Nobody is judging your profile, your logo, your brand aesthetic. Instead, they're evaluating whether the service actually works. And that spares you the enormous amount of mental energy most entrepreneurs unknowingly spend on looking good instead of running their business. Thomas Stanley documented this in his book, The Millionaire Next Door. In his research on thousands of American millionaires, he found that most of them weren't doctors or celebrities. They were laundromat owners, owners of unglamorous businesses, distributors, industrial cleaners, people in the service sector that nobody on the street would ever guess were millionaires because they don't spend energy trying to look like one. This is where it becomes personal for me, too. Throughout this research, I spoke with dozens of boring business owners, and almost every single time the same phrase came up. The moment I stopped needing people to think I was successful was the moment I actually started becoming successful. Admitting that is uncomfortable because it means admitting you used to care too much about what other people thought, whether you intended or not. A boring business forces you to let go of your ego, and letting go of your ego is almost always the true starting point of building something lasting. The third shift is that you start thinking in terms of systems rather than jobs. This shift is about how your relationship with the work itself gets restructured. People who work at rental companies aren't thinking about working harder. They're thinking about how to optimize routes, how to shorten the time between jobs. That's a radical shift in perspective, moving from how much can I work to how much can the system I built produce. Most people who work for someone else never get the chance to think this way because they don't own the system, they're a part of it. Once you become the person who designs the system, your brain starts asking different questions. Instead of asking, how do I do my job faster? You start asking, how do I keep this running without me being there? There's something I want to be honest about here because almost nobody talks about it. Not every boring business requires the same amount of starting capital or the same level of hands on involvement. Buying an existing established laundromat can require significant upfront capital, while starting a maintenance service with a single truck and basic equipment is a far smaller investment. Both can be boring businesses, but they demand entirely different systems thinking from day one. Walker Deibel, in his book Buy Then Build, lays out an idea that completely changed how I look at entrepreneurship. Buying an existing business that's already running, even one that's boring or has no innovative edge at all, is statistically far safer than starting one from scratch. His core point is that most people overvalue the original idea and undervalue a proven system with real customers and real cash flow. A laundromat that's been operating in the same neighborhood for over a decade has already answered the hardest question. Any business faces, is there real demand? All you have to do is run and improve the system rather than build it from zero. Starting a business from scratch is like trying to build a house with no blueprint, deciding where each wall goes as you go along. Whereas buying an already running business means taking a foundation that's been tested over years and simply making it better than the previous owner did. The foundation, the demand, the location, the customers already exist. Your job is to improve the system, not to guess whether it will hold up. And this shift in thinking has a real practical consequence. You start evaluating opportunities differently instead of asking, how original is this idea? You start asking, how repeatable is this process? That question may sound far less exciting, but it's exactly what separates businesses that survive 10 years from the ones that vanish within 18 months. To be clear, I can't claim a boring business is an automatic guarantee of success. The data shows that a business's odds of surviving increase when it solves a constant boring need rather than a manufactured one or a passing trend. That's not magic. That's simple demand math. The fourth shift is that your relationship with fear changes. I want to slow down here for a moment. When someone decides to start a boring business, they usually face a fear that's very different from what most people imagine. It's not the fear of what if I fail in front of everyone, because, as we already mentioned, nobody watches a dumpster rental business the way they watch a product launch on social media. The real fear here is much quieter. What if this stays boring forever? What if it never becomes exciting? And here's the truth, it probably never will. A laundromat will never give you the thrill of a viral product launch. A storage business will never give you an adrenaline rush. And that's exactly why it works. Because while most people are chasing excitement, very few are chasing stability. And over time, it's stability that builds real wealth. As Benjamin Graham points out in The Intelligent Investor, in the short run, the market is a voting machine driven by emotion, but in the long run, it's a weighing machine that measures real results. The same holds true for businesses. In the short term, everyone gets excited about what's flashy, but in the long term, what matters is steady cash flow sustained over years. Years ago, when I first started studying finance, I used to think success was supposed to feel spectacular. If I wasn't feeling excitement or adrenaline, I assumed something was wrong. It took me time to understand that most people who build financial freedom describe their daily lives as calm, even monotonous. It turns out excitement was never what we were looking for. It was just a motivational tool. Now we've arrived at the fifth shift, and this is where your definition of risk flips entirely. There's one thing in this video I want you to remember more than anything else, and almost nobody ever talks about it. Most people believe a boring business is less risky simply because it's less exciting. That's a dangerous oversimplification. Think about it this way. A business built around a passing fad has demand that could vanish overnight because of some viral challenge. Whereas a pool maintenance business, a junk removal business, a storage rental business depends on needs that already exist. No matter what's trendy at the moment, pools will always need maintenance, people will always produce trash. Homes will always be too small for the amount of stuff the average family accumulates. And that's the real shift. You stop measuring the risk of starting something new by how safe it feels, and start measuring it by how permanent the need you're meeting actually is. Once you internalize that, you start seeing opportunity in places where you used to see nothing but boredom. The lack of real market need is consistently cited as the primary reason failed businesses shut down. The real risk was never choosing something boring. The real risk has always been pouring all your time and money into a need that might never actually be met. As George Clason writes in The Richest Man in Babylon, wealth doesn't come by accident. It comes from consistently following simple principles. Even when those principles aren't exciting, that book is 100 years old and it still holds up because it describes something that trends and fashions never change. There's one more thing that matters: how you react to bad economic news. For instance, if your business sells a product tied to a passing trend, Every piece of news about shifting consumer behavior worries you because you have no idea whether your business will still be relevant in 3 or 5 months. But if your income is tied to a constant need, economic headlines affect you far less because some needs don't disappear even during a recession. In fact, some boring businesses actually grow when the economy gets tougher because people feel forced to cut costs and turn to cheaper solutions like renting a storage unit for their extra belongings instead of moving into a bigger house. That's the essence of the fifth shift. Instead of fearing where the economic headlines are heading, you start understanding which types of businesses perform well, even when the news is bad. Now ask yourself honestly, which of these five shifts I've described bothered you the most? Not which one you liked the most, which one bothered you the most, because that's the clearest sign of which part of your mindset is still stuck in the old way of thinking. Let's move on to the most common mistakes people make. The first mistake is choosing a business based on income level rather than actual local demand. People see a storage business doing well in another city and assume it will do just as well in their own without checking whether that area has the same population density or the same moving patterns. Demand is always local before it's ever national. The second mistake is underestimating working capital. It's not just the startup cost, it's the cost of keeping the business afloat for the first 6 to 12 months until customer flow stabilizes. Calculating the cost of opening a business is common practice, but according to data from the U.S. Small Business Administration, 82% of small business failures stem not from a lack of good ideas, but from cash flow problems. The third mistake is trying to scale before mastering a single unit, buying 2 or 3 storage facilities or 2 junk removal trucks before you truly understand how to run just one multiplies your problems instead of multiplying your profit. The fourth mistake is treating a business as something temporary rather than a long term system. Some people undermine the exact period when a business is finally maturing by telling themselves, I'll do this for 2 years and then move on to something more interesting. The fifth mistake is copying someone else's model without adjusting it to your own risk tolerance and working capital. For example, watching someone else run 5 junk removal trucks and wanting the exact same business, wanting to replicate in your first year what that person spent years building, probably starting with just one truck, is a recipe for financial stress. Every boring business has a starting form and a scaled form built up over years, and the most costly mistake is confusing the two. If you have a certain amount of capital but plenty of time, businesses like plumbing, pool maintenance, landscaping, or residential waste collection require low startup capital, mainly just tools and a vehicle, though they do require your physical presence in the early stages. If you have a bit more capital but less time because you're working elsewhere, businesses like laundromats or small storage facilities are a better fit, though they require higher upfront capital. If your priority is minimizing direct interaction with customers, businesses like dumpster rentals or vending machines work better since they involve minimal human interaction compared to services that require being present in a customer's home. Oliver had worked at a mid-sized logistics company for 10 years. He had a good salary and knew he'd reached about as high as he could go there. He bought a small laundromat in his area that had been running for 12 years, with working machines and an established customer base. He didn't change the name or rebrand it flashily. He simply maintained the machines, adjusted the operating hours to match customer flow, and within 18 months, this business was bringing in more monthly income than his logistics salary. He became the owner of his own time, a different kind of wealth that almost nobody appreciates until they actually have it. James, on the other hand, spent 4 years bouncing between exciting ideas that all started with a burst of enthusiasm and ended up in the same place: a crypto project, a clothing store, a supplement brand, a content channel. There was no sustainable cash flow, not enough customers, and after 6 months, he had no motivation left to continue. You can't say James worked less than Oliver. The problem was never effort. The problem was that every one of James's ideas was tied to something trendy when it needed to be tied to a genuine need. Instead, no matter the trend, the difference between Oliver and James was never luck, intelligence, or effort. It was the source of the demand each of them chose to chase. Oliver learned this lesson over time. James is probably out there right now learning it again with a different idea, hoping this time it'll work. And the part of this video I most want you to take away is this: whether you end up like Oliver or like James is decided not the moment you open the business, but at the decision stage when the idea is born. The moment a boring idea crosses your mind and you automatically dismiss it because it doesn't seem impressive enough. If you've made it this far, you now hold something most people never take the time to understand: that a boring business isn't boring by accident. It's boring because it solves something constant, something that isn't tied to a trend or a moment of popularity, something that keeps existing even if the rest of the world changes its mind about what's fashionable. And I want to tell you this, my dear friends: real wealth stories almost never get shared on social media because real wealth is built through patience, consistency, and decisions that look perfectly ordinary from the outside. If you decide to bring even one of these five shifts into your life starting today, I have no doubt that 10 years from now, you'll thank yourself for it. I look forward to your questions in the comments. I read every single one of them. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next video.